Hi there, everybody. My name is Kate, and welcome to my channel, Trinergy Awakens Naturally. So it's a little raw and real and kind of off the cuff all of a sudden. However, I wanted to explain something that I think many of us do not understand, and it changed my life, is changing my life to continue to learn more about it. And I like to share, information with people because this is applicable to all people all the time. And yet people with very severe sensitivities and nervous systems that really, need some extra attention. Everyone does, pardon me. Everyone needs to pay attention to their nervous system. However, neurodivergent people or high sensitives, people that really experientially grab the world with their nervous system through all these senses of sight, sound, etc., and it really impacts them, and they're an empath, or that's how they're receiving so many somatic experiences through their senses, etc. That can be a bit much sometimes when we don't really know or understand that spirituality is a lot of talk about energy. However, what we very frequently have missed up until now and are starting to now integrate the information. The programs are out there, and we're getting the word out across the land for everyone, and especially my neurodivergence and us that are sitting in that kind of twitchy energy nervous system spot, that the high sensitives, the empaths, the people who work with energy, the spiritual journey stuff, oftentimes we're not understanding that we can be moving energy through us that can be quite damaging to the nervous system, even if we're letting go of things, even if we are cutting karma, so to speak, if we're having a clearing. We have to be, in my opinion, let me speak to it from my personal experience, that I really was snatched through some pretty severe nervous system experiences where I was in one state of being and snatched very rapidly to something else that was very traumatic, more traumatic, less traumatic, but it was changing and shifting, and then all of a sudden it's quiet, spooky loud again. That being shifted so rapidly, most of us don't already have a good way that we're regulating already our nervous system. And so if you think about our anatomy, the brain, the big brain is the frontal lobe, if you will, the critical thinking, the frontal lobe, the majority of the brain. It's the top brain, if you will, and it's for picking up information. It's our logic, and it's assessment of a scene. What am I looking at? And the receptors in here that go with the vagus nerve, that whole vagal system in here, goes all the way through the body. And when we're looking at the facial nerves, all of the vagal system comes through the facial nerves. That nerve system is all, comprehensive and complete. The vagus nerve is the regulator, basically, and the interface of how I'm going to process information from out there to how I'm going to regulate that and move that through and allow that to process in the entirety of the nervous system. So if you think about that top brain, we're looking out, we have our receptors here, we're smelling, we're seeing, we're taking in, and we're receiving. If we're here, we're actually looking around and our eyes are scanning the environment. We may or may not be, really upset. However, if we're making quick, vestibular rocking motions, that's going to get, the vagal system a little bit perturbed and a little bit bothered, and possibly a lot perturbed and a lot bothered, depending on how dysregulated we've been, how long it's been, what kind of trauma we're carrying, and what our baseline tolerance and, ability is. If we have a very low tolerance anyway, that's going to make those experiences into an instant burnout pretty quickly. Most of us, though, have grown some very enormous, huge, ridiculous tolerance level for the stress. However, it's still very hard on the body, and therefore we have a low capacity. We have a very, very small capacity for what we can tolerate. So when it, just really reaches that level, because the threshold has been breached so high that it only takes that far to just kind of snap off. And that's why you see, especially now when people are super duper dysregulated, frightened, and not sure what's happening, and they're, scanning their environment, and there's so much cognitive dissonance that I don't really know what's happening, and we're coiling into ourselves and we're expressing perhaps body postures and feelings, associations that we've never expressed before or felt before. Maybe we felt more confident in the past, or maybe we've always felt really, really terrified, and it's just doubled down even more, because collectively there's just a lot of different varying, swinging, mood lability things all over the place. So we might not know what's happening or how to regulate any of it if we don't understand that all of these this structure in here in our face being so vitally important. The nostrils, how we breathe, we receive information differently when we're nose breathing versus when we're mouth breathing. Guess which one is more emotionally intelligent? Would be the nose breathing. That's why people joke and they say, talk about the mouth breathers, is that when we breathe through our nose, we're actually capturing a different type of experience and a different feeding of oxygen to the brain. It's received differently through those receptors than if we're just mouth breathing, and we tend to take shallower breaths, and when we're frightened, we'll lock into a position of emotional freeze, where something may have happened 30 years ago, where something may have happened 3 days ago. It doesn't matter. It's piling in on top of itself. And so if we do some stimulation with the nervous system, if we work with the polyvagal system, we can help to integrate that big brain and the little brain. The little brain back there, that little guy, he's overworked. He's real super overworked, and he's got zero conscience. That is a reptilian, and I don't mean the lizard that's taking over the planet Earth. I mean like the least evolved portion of the brain is where the driver's seat gets filled immediately when we start feeling threatened and we have no regulation between the two. The interface isn't capturing information exactly correctly because it's biased based on a whole lot of trauma. Oh, this looks like something. It smells like something. My capacity is real, or my capacity for this is real low, and my tolerance, man, I've just reached, I'm right there. I only had 20% left, and you're at least 80, and I just can't cope with that. So we go into our fight, flight, freeze thing. So it kind of turns into a hardened pattern where we can see people that suddenly that capacity, they might run a tolerance of being able to really put up with twice the bullshit, all the time. They may look like they're really hanging in there, and then one day that old nervous system makes a decision that doesn't really take the individual, its ego, or anything of the, considerations of life into effect, because that little reptilian response back there, it doesn't have a conscience, it doesn't keep time, and it's got no other function except keep this organism alive. Period. And it's not a matter of, keep it alive if it doesn't hurt another person. Keep it alive if it doesn't, become a whole thief. Keep it alive if it doesn't become a raging monster. None of the ifs, there are none. It is keep this organism alive under all circumstances, period, because that's the survival instinct of a primal species that was installed with, this is how you stay alive, and since we're not really having to be running outrunning the woolly mammoth or whatever we were cohorts with, that was our predator, we're not really truly having to do that anymore. However, we forgot to evolve that part of the brain that said that, and we also outrun the frontal lobe and the logic of money, 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 and how to really think things through without really bringing our heart with us. And so our lower brain is stuck with that being the least evolved, unconscionable, quite unconscionable with the survival thing. When we get to that, oh no, fight or flight, that loses all bearing. Generally speaking, when it is absolutely tapped out, we lose that, and somehow we're thrown into this situation of, wait a minute, what just happened here? Where somebody that appeared stable, they just one day, you see it snap. Some people can off-gas it enough to just kind of explode a little bit and be a real jerk boss, or they go and they have some somatic release by laying hands up in different places, doing things, boxing, or whatever else they might be doing that isn't so very pleasant. However, that's what the nervous system is looking for. Release this. This is dysregulating me. I don't know how to handle this, and I don't have enough information because I'm down here in a millions of years old evolved emotional thing that I know exactly how I feel in my gut feeling, my instinct. It's directly related to that survival thing. However, I think I've got to survive all day, every day, period, because that's how I feel and how I'm bringing my world in. And so can you see where a very poorly evolved in commiserate timing with the lower brain, that bigger brain, the big brain versus the little brain. Little brain really has the whole, package brought to it with the heart, because quite honestly, I'd rather have somebody that wasn't quite bright or, self-reflective or whatever, the big brain could bring in critical thinking, logic, etc., or putting things together sequentially. I'd much rather have a person that was leading with their heart and being a little squishy, that I can teach to mold in boundaries and associations with, proper behavior, proper response, etc., and really build that in, rather than have to, really tear down and find that heart, because that's a more difficult process. We end up scaring each other when we speak, but we need that social engagement. The vagus nerve needs to know, are you safe? That is absolutely what that whole response is asking for through the vagal system. Is I'm the mediator for boundaries here. The vagus nerve is the boundary setter, because it's primarily receiving. 80% of its job is to receive the information, not to really talk with the brain about what to do with that information necessarily. It just starts sending out sensations throughout the body. And if you have sensations in your body that you don't understand, that they're just a somatic bundle, I say just like they're it's easy, that it's simply a bundle of leftover residue piled upon 1111, piled upon from years of systemic trauma, or from a traumatic incident one time that never cleared, and it never has cleared. Every time we've somatically engaged with it in our nervous system, our polyvagal went, I'm not really sure what that is, so I'm gonna kind of hang back here in sus mode, which is kind of a freeze, kind of a I'm just kind of looking, and we think we're building capacity, and what we're building is tolerance. We're building tolerance for really, high stress levels that, yes, we as humans, we've figured out how to medicate and addict and, bully and do all these things to kind of weirdly off-gas all of that twitchy, nervous energy stuff. And yet, it's not really off-gassed for real if we go have an energy healing session, if we have, some sort of energy work done, or if we have fascial release, if we're simultaneously not helping our nervous system to kind of rehab and reteach itself and help engage the neuroplasticity of the brain, we're not really using the full capacity that our beautiful system already has in helping to heal itself. We all go through life not doing it at all until we do it. So it's not like people can't live that way. It's just, it's so deeply uncomfortable. And when we can really marry up the idea that my emotions down here, this is where the vagus nerve goes all the way down into the abdomen. It's tight, really, it's here. And when we say gut instinct, we have our gut mind or our gut brain. That's really a gut response, is oftentimes, not always, until you've really perfected that skill and been able to live some other mode besides survival. We can really rely on that to go, yeah, I really feel that. And when you start asking your body, where am I feeling this? And I'm feeling it right in here. The lower burners are where, the vagus nerve is just kind of rolling around in there with a whole lot of hot lower chakra stuff, which is raw. It's unrefined. It's like crude oil. It's not terribly usable, as a refined source until it's refined. However, until we know that that's what we're dealing with, sometimes we're shooting, crude oil out of our mouth, when we really, if we were working to really regulate to help keep our nervous system in check and work with our, polyvagal system and really engage our world feeling safe and repatterning the neuroplasticity, when we're doing all of that, we can then begin that refinement. We open the channels, if you will. We open the full channel to divine, or to the space that makes us feel most peaceful and at home, and in that safe place to fall. My tribe is here, I'm good. It's going to set that tone, if you will. It's going to set concert A for what is comfortable in my body for me. That's my home frequency. This is my home address. And now I know this is me. So then that's setting that there, and we can always know, this is really rubbing me strangely. That's a boundary violation of some kind. We either are feeling as if we're being invaded in some way, or we feel that we possibly could be invading something else or someone else. We're feeling a blurring of lines. I no longer clearly know where I am anymore. Now, when you're in the womb, part of these neck muscles, proprioceptors, I believe they're called, part of these receptors here is in sensing. We map out our identity in utero by we mush up against the wall of the uterus, and we realize, oh, okay, this is me here, and then maybe we come over here, and we're feeling that, and we have it all through a little tiny body that's completely nude and just kind of brushing up. And that's how we begin to separate ourselves as a self identity from mother, from world, from something. Before, we're floating around in amniotic fluid, and that seems probably like the most home we'll ever be in, until we return back to whatever we consider that floaty, non-identified feeling to be. However, when we get big enough, and we're embodied enough, we're starting to feel ourselves that boundary of understanding this is where I start and that ends, and where that ends and I start again, where I begin and end, period. And when we're stripped of that ability to really keep that growing and developing into our nervous system, and rather we're given the opposite of, my body boundaries are telling me I feel really strange whenever I'm 3 years old, but we have really, just overbearing people in our life who are pretty sure they need to tell us how to regulate ourselves. We oftentimes are told, no, you don't feel that, or no, it doesn't matter. Especially when we're spectrum people. I had a hard time myself when I was a child. I was told to sit still, be quiet, all the time. And my body needed somatically to be running. I was like Forrest Gump, if I was awake, I was moving and I was running. I was doing something because my body instinctively, naturally, from birth, understood. I've never known a time when I didn't feel that way, that need. I'm highly active when I am. And yet I went through a long period of my adult life where, I wasn't at all. And it was only because my nervous system was so smashed down with depressant medications. They were things to suppress and calm my nervous system, and we're messing around with all the chemicals in my brain to regulate everything. And primarily what we have here, folks, is a polyvagal thing that it needs to understand that we understand our own boundaries. And when I started working with that and went through a major life change, let me go back into the womb with myself and start really bumping up against that and say, oh, that's not my identity. I'm gonna have to brush up against something in my world that isn't reminding me of things that really weren't my identity, because we'll pattern back. Unfortunately, we'll tune back to the last known home frequency that something else set for us until we set it for ourselves. If I don't know what my concert A is, then I might be willing to settle for what that person tells me concert A is, and I'm verbally working a real, battle of the demons kind of thing in my top brain with my lower brain, and I'm not understanding why. And I want to leave you with a thought that many, many years ago, we went through periods in history where the bells were completely melted down, bells of churches and cathedrals and just town squares, etc. They rang in churches, particularly sacred temples, etc., all over. They had harmonic vessels and vases of some kind that they would build into these church bells and throughout the different structures, because it was harmonically supporting the architecture. And the town itself, if you went to Town A, you would hear Town A's frequency. Their bell was tuned to what they collectively, as a consciousness, long before we had the fork to tune exactly to what we wanted it to be at the forks level, the town and the community just came to an agreement. Just collectively, they rose up and came to this is the bell we have. There was no voting on it. It was just a natural, pleasant, hey, we like this one. And yet when you would go, if you went from town A to town B, they would be a different tone and a different frequency. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why and how and everything else, and I'm not speaking to this because that brings up a lot of anxiety for folks. However, the 440 that you hear in music, that was artificially installed, and I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theories about why. However, I am going to say that if we have famous musicians in our past, Mozart, Brahms, Bach, etc., who made comment about you're switching the actual the hertz here, from 4 to 432, and there's not, we tune to a 440 in an orchestra, that's an A. However, if you take the theories of years back and generations back, and tribes and small villages and communities, they had their own frequency, they had their own frequential, if you will, address, and that was ding 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 ding. That's what that was. So when you eliminate that whole individuality, that whole harmonic, we're not all 440. According to history, we've all been tuned to 440, if you will, and I'm not making a statement of whether it's good or bad, and I'm not getting into the Schumann resonance. I fully support sound therapy. I have a background in music and singing, so I'm way into it, and I'm not debating it. I'm simply saying that if we know and we understand the past, there'd be good reason why we'd want to put everybody on one unified, concert for some pretty dark reasons. However, aside from that, we did in the past know that this was, we didn't have this. We had many different options for where we could start concert A and set that standard. And as people began to be more mobile and understand themselves and, hey, we can take this idea to this idea, they started realizing that, wow, town A and town D have got wildly different with 30 points between them sometimes or something, that this one set here, this one set here. And the experience that one would have in these sacred sites, they weren't all they weren't all churches, but in these sacred temples, sites, and buildings, whatever purpose they had, when the bells were rung within them, they would then connect here with what the community's frequential home plate is, or was. They would connect here, and that's how they came to it. They would feel that. They would sing, in the church, probably is where that would happen most. They would be singing or chanting, which gets you even closer to the purest vibration. They were chanting, singing, possibly swaying, which gets our polyvagal system real happy with that bilateral, vestibular grounding thing. Ooh, it soothes that, makes it feel like, wow, my social engagement is very safe. I'm confirming that I'm part of a tribe and I feel safe. I'm not going to be ousted. I don't have to survive on my own. No need to do anything except, wow, be really, really cool in my safe place that I have landed here, and I feel good, and I also feel like I could probably have a fairly yucky day and I'd still be all right here, Those are the kinds of conversations, if the polyvagal was going to speak, would probably be saying that in these places where this is set to me, man, this is our standard, our community, but not just me because I'm selfish and I want my music to be at this, and now I must insist that everyone put their music at this, and toot just passed. If I wasn't doing that, then I just let music ride very naturally, and I allow the organic frequency of each individual to gather in the 3 or more, where that's going to really bring a harmonic resonance. And imagine putting that village with this village. We didn't need to eradicate another village because they had a different note. That's the best part, is it's meant to be harmonic, We're not meant to be a monotone chant as a species. Human beings are no species, in my opinion. However, I can only speak affirmatively with what I can logically speak to other humans about their experience, that we're really not meant to be a unified field of one monk chant, okay? We're not meant to be one on one frequency. When we talk about the unified field, I'm more inclined to think about the rainbow prophecy includes the rainbow of colors, the rays of creation, and all the colors have vibrational colors and frequencies, and you're singing with this, and it's a full package of all the senses being harmonically resonant in a unified field. That's what makes it unified, is the fact that, yeah, we're all in here together, and I'm a violin playing my part in the same key as everybody else, and the flautist over there is playing her part in this same key. We're all in the same key. That's what an orchestra or band or, Van Halen, it doesn't matter what type of music. However, if you're all going to play together and not want to hurt each other with the and all the cognitive dissonance or the harmonic dissonance, then you all start in the same starting point, and whoever sets the standard for that, guitar has been showing, rock and roll anyway, rock guitar has been showing us for a long time how to tweak our music and tune it up and tune it down. We even had some in the past that they were accused of, practicing some very dark and evil stuff because they were tuning their music down. I don't know the accuracy of whether I'm, willing to go into that or not. I don't know. I just know there's been a lot of debate and hot, magic work around, fanciful thinking with eradicating all the bells, with a lot of different stories about why. And we have musicians taking a lot of heat that they're trying to change things. Maybe they are, and maybe that's a good thing. I always think change is a very good thing when it's done and there's a very good harmonically sound reason for everyone to do it, because that's what our nervous system likes, is knowing that these decisions at all levels, whether it's me making it for myself or me making it for my entire community here at Pride Rock and I'm Mufasa, no matter where we fall in all of that, we want to know that we are safe and that we can provide safety. We really do. We're not looking to be bullies. If you put a, baseline human, just put them in a little jar, regular women, let them be born in a jar with no influence from outside, they would not grow up and be a 5-year-old monster. They would have a very different experience, by the time they were 5, if they had zero outer influence and they had a bunch of other, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, whatever age growing with them in the purity of those interactions, race, color, religion, cultural bias, so many labels that really hold no weight as far as the true identity. However, they carry a lot of dark energy and karma because of all the associations made with them. They're not part of it. If you could grow a human in a pure can like that, there wouldn't be a part of all of that. They wouldn't have the influence of ever growing to become associated with any feeling or anything with it, because it wouldn't exist. It would be feeding itself a different way of life, not like this. And so that experiment, of really that thought experiment of what would that be like with no influence, it would naturally have to be children that definitely understood themselves at a much more somatic, soma, body-based way, that interacted in a more present, now moment kind of experience, that was fluidly moving through energetic exchange with people at a more easily aligned and more harmonically aligned and more balanced integration of the heart and mind between self and others. However, you cannot have a harmonic convergence, a heart-mind coherence with someone that can't reach you where you are. If they can't tune, to a 440, if I have an instrument that's so out of tune, or that it just doesn't have the capacity, the string capacity or whatever, whatever the instrument would be, that say there's, that's not one. We have instruments that's outside the range of what that instrument can do. No matter how you tune it, no matter what you do, that particular note is out of the range of those strings and that configuration on that, wooden apparatus or that brass, whatever. It's just never going to squeak and leak that way. It's just not, it doesn't have it. And that's how people kind of become, is we're in a whole, concert here with an instrument that has no viable applicable use because it's not tuning in here very well. And that can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. However, it's highly distressing when we're ill-matched, mismatched, and we know it and we feel it and we're feeling all the body stuff and don't know what to do with it and don't really also understand that that's a natural response. It's unnatural to the human experience, it's very unnatural. However, it's a natural response to that, toxic energy, that dysfunction, and that unnatural, experience of being shocked constantly or not being able to really make sense with all of my, receptors here. What am I taking in? What is this? I don't understand. I don't have a bank of knowledge for what this is. Can somebody bring me up to speed? And the answer is no, not really fully. They can help you get in line here. But the best thing is really to get some polyvagal work done and to pay attention to resonance as a more realistic and viable experience, if that metaphor works for you, because the actual frequencies do in fact work. So if the metaphor also works, then you can start building the paradigm or the framework for how you can understand an interface. Wow, I'm in a an orchestra pit with a bunch of players that seem to be doing a different, tune today, and I either can't tune in there, and they're not willing to tune into me. So I think I need to go and, take care, and let me bump up against something over here that doesn't feel quite so. I'm not sure I want my boundary to be right there. I'm pretty sure that that's a warning sign that, I need to get away from that electric fence. I have to just get over there if we start to feel that. However, most of us are just trained to, zip right over that electric fence and be standing there with the zzz, while we're pressing into other people's boundaries or allowing them to press into ours, because we're going to feel the zzz regardless of whether we're pressing over somebody else's or we're being pressed into. We feel that violation, and it zaps on us and kind of, works on us, whether we're the predator or the prey. It doesn't matter. It does affect the nervous system. Either dynamic, it does affect the nervous system, and we're not coping very well either way. So I hope that helps you understand better, and I hope it helps you do something with your day, and I hope no matter what, that you're having a beautiful day that feels better to you, that feels more regulated, that gives you a nugget of something to go look up some information if it appeals to you, and if it doesn't, go do something else that does, really meet that need. And, get in touch with the body here, get real present, and be looking at those tools of somatic healing and fascial release, EMDR, EFT. If these aren't things you know about, polyvagal theory, it's a great time to get really close and associated with it. And, there are many places where there are resources. So I would look for, start with Dr. Bessel's work, perhaps with The Body Keeps the Score, and go from there. I like my science, and then I add my woo-woo and my intuition with it after. However, I don't start with my woo-woo and my intuition, because I might get caught up in some fanciful thinking if I don't ground it, in some research. So balancing big brain, little brain. Neither one of them is in charge necessarily, unless the other one doesn't know their function, and can't integrate. Play nicely, and they can. They just have to be taught how to play nicely, so with one another instead of out here weirdly. So anyway, take care. As I said, enjoy your day, and remember to get within your skin, because you're divine. It's quite beautiful, quite regulatory, and loves you, and can balance you just fine, and it takes care of you all the time. Take care of your beautiful selves, and I'll see you again next time, friends. Bye-bye.